So welcome everyone to this webinar. We're going to be covering leading in a crisis. So talking about what creates resilience, what are some of the stories that we've seen resilient companies be able to share about how they've embraced this new environment we're working in and all the different things that have gone on around understanding what has happened, how do teams need to adapt to that, and what's that new normal for how teams are going to interact, and then how do they align and rally around that new strategy. So here's my quick introduction. So my name's Rob Friday. For those of you who don't know me, I've been with Predictive Success a little over 10 years now, lectured at a number of different universities, wrote my first book this year, Talent Optimizer, which is the stories that I've accumulated over the past 10 or so years of working with organizations to really optimize talent and create the most effective cultures and what I've seen work really well out there. I'm just going to stop my video just to make sure that I get a good quality internet connection here for everyone. Our company, Predictive Success, why do we do what we do? Well, we're the leader in talent optimization. We share strategies for how companies can optimize around talent, leveraging Predictive Index, the leading software that we work with. We align people to business strategy to create a competitive advantage. And we serve over 600 clients across North America and around the world. We're based in Toronto, as well as several other offices across North America. So getting started, needing to adapt. What are the things that are going on right now? On the left side here, you can see some of the different challenges that we've come across with clients that are going through either reorganizations or sales challenges, or in some cases, they've had to completely close altogether. And how do you deal with that when it comes to engaging employees, managing employees, helping them deal with the new realities? What are some of the challenges that leaders face? So the things that we've identified, the problems in a lot of cases that leaders run into, is the things that made them successful in a certain environment tend to work against them during times of stress, or they can work against them in times of stress because we tend to overuse our strengths. Every leader has different strengths. There's this philosophy out there that leaders are well-rounded, and that's not necessarily always the case. Leaders build great, well-rounded teams, but leaders typically have certain strengths that they rely on, and then they rely on their team members to fill them in where their blind spots are. And sometimes we call those back a t-shirt situations where it's something you can't see, but others can. So we'll talk about that. What are those strengths that we tend to overutilize during times of stress or times of change? We'll talk about how to align teams and talent around crisis priorities. And then we'll talk about how to unfreeze a workforce. If you find that there's been a lot of change and people are uncertain about the new priorities and the new direction, how do we help them get familiar with that, get comfortable with it, and move forward in a productive way? But first, just what is resilience? So sometimes this can be a little unclear. We define it as, it's defined by most organizations as the ability to recover from setbacks, adapt well to change, and keep going in the face of adversity. So where does resilience come from? This was a Harvard Business Review article, and it's interesting that most leaders believe that they get their resilience from themselves. Some get it from their relationships, some from the organization, but myself was overwhelmingly the most popular response. So your own resilience is really what's going to drive this. Then we often look at what drains resilience, and this is interesting. So in that same study, they surveyed over 800 respondents, and the number one thing that drains resilience, if you look down there at the bottom, when I'm managing a difficult relationship or politics in the workplace. So that brings up an important point. When people are going through times of change or times of stress, that self-aware leader becomes incredibly important, and understanding how to adapt a leadership style in order to engage people through challenging times and make sure that we're creating that environment where they have what they need to do the work that they're expected to do. Just real quick, high level for those of you who came across this online or aren't familiar with what talent optimization is. Talent optimization is a process and a framework that clients use and that we help clients basically implement. And it's all about turning business strategy into business results through people. And every organization typically has a financial plan. They typically have some kind of an operational plan, but one of the things that's often lacking is a people plan. And in order to execute on that financial plan or that operational plan, you need people to get aligned around what they're doing, and also make sure that they understand the different priorities and those are communicated effectively. So step one of talent optimization is design. Figure out what do we need to do right now. And there's different diagnostics that can be done in order to align or figure out what are the senior leaders in the organization agreeing on that are important right now? What are they disagreeing on? And how do we get all rowing in the same direction as to what's most important right now? Once we've designed that business strategy, the next piece is hire the right people or onboard the right people or promote the right people to the team to help them execute or help us execute on that strategy that we've designed. Understand what do we need to do to keep people inspired, pushing the right buttons. Everybody's wired differently. The most effective leaders, again, build those teams that are well-rounded. They aren't necessarily well-rounded themselves, but once you understand how to adapt your style to push the different buttons, you can keep people motivated and engaged, and then have a process for diagnosing what's working and what's not. And that's a really neat part of the process, being able to look at the different forces of engagement, or in a lot of cases disengagement, things like fit to role. How's the person dealing with the job they're doing, and how has that job changed? Fit to manager. Is the manager pushing the right button with a person? Fit to team. Does the person understand their role in the team, and is the team all rowing in the same direction? And then fit to culture. Every culture is different, and understanding how people interact with that culture and be able to measure that and actually get data to see how that changes over time. Once you have all these pieces in place, you have an objective path to be able to turn that business strategy into business results. So step one is really knowing the source. How do our people behave? The predictive index assessment takes about 6 minutes. There's no right or wrong answers. It's pretty quick and painless, available in over 70 languages. It's scientifically validated. It gives us measures of these 4 core behavioral drives and 1 secondary factor. And I'll just quickly go through those for those of you who aren't familiar with PI. Dominance is the drive to exert influence over people or events, or the degree to which an individual seeks control over their environment. Extroversion is the drive for social interaction, or the degree to which an individual seeks social interaction. Patience is the drive for consistency and stability. Formality is the drive to conform to rules and structure. And then there's another factor which is measured, which is objectivity. And that's just a measure of decision-making style or preference. Does the person prefer more objective information to make decisions, or do they trust their instincts more heavily? These factors have been validated over 350 validity studies. We get millions of assessments done every year. And it gives us a measure of these different behavioral drives that allow us to understand what different people need, and also what buttons to push as a leader to get people engaged and motivated and productive. So from that, we're able to look at many different styles or profiles. And these little squiggly lines or graphs here are basically the measures that predictive index gives us, but each of the different profiles is assigned what's called a reference profile. And that gives us a shorthand version of understanding what drives different people and how do they interact in the workplace. And that can help us then align teams around strategy to know, what do we need on this team? What do those different parts of the puzzle look like in order to make sure that we've assembled the right pieces to deliver the result we're looking for. So adapting how you lead is an incredibly important part of the resilience process. Quick little case study. So Nick Ham is a client of mine. He's the CEO of Scholars at Your Service. They're a student painting business where basically they teach students how to run painting franchises every summer. Now, they do historically have done most of their recruiting on campus. Obviously, that's been a big challenge this year. In 2019, over 90% of the leads for the business came from cold calling, door knocking. Now, in 2020, that's dropped to under 10%. So you can imagine that's a huge shift. That's a massive, hurdle for that business to overcome. So he's had to step back and pivot his strategy quickly. First of all, he looked at, what are the opportunities out there? He was able to identify that if he shifted some of his strategy from having students run independent painting franchises to actually bringing them into the organization as employees, you'd be able to capture some government grants to help subsidize some of the cost of having these students and actually still give them a meaningful learning experience by running the business, but also doing it in a more safe way where they're guaranteed income through some of these government grants. And then thinking about how can he actually generate the business? Well, looking at what does that past customer list look like? They had over 24,000 customer leads that they historically were not actively marketing to. So that was a huge opportunity. He had a database of all these customers, so started reaching out to them, actually got a telemarketing license and was able to start now generating business by retraining the people that traditionally would have been cold callers, door to door, to teach them how to do it effectively over the phone. And it's actually pretty interesting. They've now been able to start doing estimates and customer walkthroughs via Zoom or FaceTime. So they can actually just have a customer call them up, walk them through the house, deliver, basically do the estimate virtually over the phone or over the internet, and sell the entire process via Zoom. And he's been able to pivot that business by looking at, how do I retrain my people quickly? How do I know what they need? And how do I make sure I support them effectively to make all these changes? This is actually a pretty neat way to be able to look at business strategy. So exploring teams or exploring organizations, focus on new opportunities. It's all about investigating new ground, capturing new industries, developing new products, new services, and really growing and taking a lot of risk. Organizations that would fit into this quadrant would be ones like Uber or Waymo or Airbnb or HubSpot or Tesla. If you think about those businesses, they're all category kings. They're all category pioneers. Airbnb is creating a new category for the way that people can share homes. Now, again, they're going through some incredibly difficult times now with this current environment. Same with many of these companies. Predictive Index would fall into the exploring category. We've historically actually been probably more in the producing category, but recently over the last few years really developed a lot of new software, and we're aggressively growing in order to develop new opportunities. So that was a clear focus for the business. Producing organizations focus on accumulating clients and building a reputation in the field. Examples of these businesses would be basically anything in the computer industry in the 1990s. It could be examples would be Ford or GM or Chrysler. The more historically large organizations that have built large supply chains, they've got a brand name. It's about harvesting the work that we've put in over many years and really developing that client base and capturing incremental pieces of market share as opposed to pioneering new industries, which would be the exploring group. Next, we've got stabilizers for stabilizing organizations. These focus on improving efficiency and predictability. Examples of these would be any of the food organizations, the grocery stores like Loblaws. A lot of transportation companies would fall into this group, so like Herb or Contrans. The airlines, stabilizing airline industry, really making sure that we're doing everything we can to be as efficient as possible. They typically operate on lower margins, but it's all about scale. The big banks, the big five in Canada would fall into the stabilizing category. And finally, we've got cultivating. Cultivating organizations focus on employee commitment, morale, and development. A lot of hospitals or frontline workers, nurses would fall into this group. Hospital foundations or charitable organizations would fall into this group as well. A lot of sports teams, when you think about the ones that perform at the highest levels, they typically have that commitment towards a vision, or they operate kind of in that flow state. And a lot of times you need the cultivators on those teams to hold the team together. I've got the Mandarin Oriental in this group as well. They would typically be in that area as well, because it's all about commitment to that customer experience and really creating that long-term customer loyalty. So hopefully that gives you some ideas of the different types of strategies that are out there, and where organizations might fall in those groups. And if you think about what's going on now, so historically, if you were an exploring group, and all of a sudden now you've had, like Airbnb, for instance, you've had to basically shut down operations. Well, how do you manage that pivot with your organization? How do you communicate the new direction to your employees and help them understand how to adapt for a period of time or indefinitely to the new reality. This is kind of neat when you can start looking at, is your team aligned around the current strategy, and having a way of diagnosing that and looking at where the actual people fall. So remember, in purple, we've got the actual priorities. And then in blue, we've got the people on the team. And I put the Microsoft logo in the bottom corner there. This is not a Microsoft case study, but it's just an example of how how an organization has had to change over time. So if you think about historically the way that Microsoft operated, they created the Windows system. That thing that was installed on computers. It was typically more, you would sell the software, it would come in CD disks and stuff. So the business historically was more about harvesting the thing that they've always been good at. And then you think about the Microsoft of today. So they had a pivot in strategy a few years ago. They brought in a new CEO, and they started thinking about what are the things that we need to do to innovate and redevelop the business for the next generation of people. Well, cultivating strategies became important. Promoting from within, driving employees to achieve with vision and passion. What is that new vision? And then improving employee loyalty and faith in the company, stop the brain drain, and then figure out the best ways to commercialize new ideas. So they created the Office 365. It's a cloud product. That's a big pivot, and it's really increased the profitability of the business. They created things like Microsoft Teams. So you look at the historical way that Microsoft operated versus today, they had a big change in priorities around the way that the business was going to operate. And they had to bring in new team members in order to do that and do it effectively. So this would be the example of kind of looking at it stage one before they brought those new team members in. And I can give you another example. So if we look at kind of what Ford would have done when they went through their redevelopment in 2008, they took a step back. They went through the financial crisis. They were obviously dealing with a lot of challenges, both financially and otherwise. And they, again, needed to align around a vision, but it was more about redefining the company's brand. They started to get off-brand a little bit. If you think about the things that Ford was historically known for, it was a car for the masses. Well, they started with getting into luxury brands and so forth. So when they created that new vision for One Ford, it was all about aligning people around this new exploring strategy and producing what we've always historically been great at, develop new pricing, and then driving growth and increased sales through increased customer retention, really relying on the things that kind of reverting back to core made them great. And you look at how you would be able to align a team with that strategy by getting those insights and then be able to look at how our team members align with that and making sure that we promote or bring the right people into that team. It's interesting when you start looking at this on like a quarterly basis or an annual basis to say, have our priorities shifted? Have the team members do we have the right team members on the team? Am I asking people to flex? If I am, how much flex is reasonable? And just managing that as in a more data-driven fashion. So leaders tend to rely heavily on what they're good at. They love using their strengths. Again, I'm a big proponent, big believer of the fact that leaders are not well-rounded. They are thorny, they are sharp in certain ways, but they are self-aware. They understand what their edges are, and they make sure that they surround themselves with people that balance them out well. So thinking about what the risk is here is if we've got an overused strength, it can result in amplifying a behavior and sometimes lacking versatility and creating unreasonable expectations or unreasonable pressure on people. So here would be an example of leading on a strength that could be effective. So the threat, my team missed our sales goal last quarter. The anxiety and stress, I'm afraid I might lose my job. Leading on strengths, set stronger goals, rely on my intense style, direct my team to step up. So, if the team thrives in this sort of pressure, the team just needs an extra little push to rise to the occasion. Vice versa, if the team isn't aligned with that type of style, how can that be counterproductive? Well, it could create more anxiety and stress. If you're pushing too hard in an unproductive way and you don't think about what the different team members need, then that pushing too hard can cause the team to fracture, cause them to fall apart, and in some cases actually cause them to underperform. I've got another example here. This is a good friend of mine and client, Eric Mickelson, together with his business partner, Rob Churin, purchased a company called You See It, which is a remote monitoring business where they basically set up cameras on construction sites in order to replace a security guard. They actually have better arrest rates. It's more cost effective, and it's basically using technology to replace or to kind of disrupt a business. So historically, they were obviously in growth mode. They forecasted they would grow the company around 15 to 16%. They actually grew at about 35% annually over the course of, I think it was like 6 years. They bought their biggest competitor in 2016, Stealth Monitoring out of Dallas. So incredible growth story, incredibly successful business. Today, over 500 employees, 3 monitoring sites, Toronto, Dallas, and Manila. Now, you would think that this business is incredibly well set up for the current environment. We've got people, in some cases, shutting down construction sites, social distancing. It's going to be, with certain people out of work, there's probably going to be increases in crime rates. So their business is going to be incredibly needed in this point. Well, they ran into a problem. The Manila Monitoring Center, if anyone was paying attention to some of the news coming out of Manila or coming out of the Philippines, they went through a very aggressive lockdown. You were not allowed to leave the part of the city where you live. If you actually did, the punishment for it could be shot on the spot. Potentially death if you were out there for a reason that was not an approved reason. So they basically had to completely pivot their business. So they ended up setting up dorms within the area where their office was. They had drastically reduced the number of people in that office. And if you think about it, Manila is on the opposite schedule as North America. So at nighttime, when most of the crime happens, it was daytime there, which is one of the reasons that they had their office there. As well, they were able to capture some of the economies of scale, given the way that they could structure things with employee compensation and so forth over there. So they had to quickly pivot, look at, what are we going to do? We can't have as many people over there. We need to set up a backup plan. So they had basically a disaster recovery plan where they quickly pivoted, set up some new offices or locations in Toronto and Dallas, had to hire 150 employees in the course of about 2.5 weeks. So being able to quickly pivot, quickly ramp up new employees, it was fascinating what Eric did. He actually used Instagram to help him with recruiting. And would use the predictive index to help them identify the right type of people for different jobs. Specifically the monitoring staff, you need someone who's very patient, very detail-oriented. He went to some of his network within the bar industry and offered a referral bonus for people that were out of work right now. And if you think about the barbacks, which was actually what he was really looking for, the people who were doing the more repetitive tasks, the people who are typically more detail-oriented, they also made great monitoring staff. So he was able to go to people who were out of work, give them an opportunity to get retrained very quickly and actually get new employment within the course of a couple of weeks when this all happened. And to make a long story short, with the fact that so many of their clients were having to shut down construction sites, they actually had their 2 busiest months ever, top sales months ever, in March and April this year. So on top of all this change that they had to do on the operational side, they also had to ramp up the installation and manage all the new sales coming in as well. So having the right diagnostics and the right pieces in place from a technology standpoint to quickly pivot, quickly ramp up new teams, and also make sure you get the right people for those objectives, allowed them to deal with this massive change, which was a pretty serious challenge, as you can imagine. So when it comes to resilient leadership, it's all about understanding yourself first, understanding your own actions and how the back of your t-shirt shows up to other people. So what are those blind spots that you need to manage? What are those blind spots that can sometimes create unproductive conflict within your teams? Talent alignment, having a way of objectively aligning strategy to talent and vice versa. So figuring out what's most important right now and having a process for that so that everybody understands what those different priorities are and that we're assigning the right responsibilities to the right people. And then productivity rekindled is all about understanding the management strategies to coach different people, those different reference profiles that I mentioned earlier. Each of those different profiles has a different strategy for how I would delegate work to them, how I would coach them, how I would motivate them, what buttons are most effective to push to keep those different people engaged, motivated, productive, and also help them deal with change as it comes about.